Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolfork. I'm a fourth-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together. Hey friends, hey, it's Lisa from Black Women Stitch and the Stitch Please podcast. And as I say every week, this is a very special episode because this episode is called Sewing and Sublimation. I love sublimation printing. It is something about it that really appeals to me, and we are going to talk about it and go through it in a really interesting and engaging way. We'll begin with understanding what sublimation printing is, defining what it is, learning about its history, a very short history lesson because apparently sublimation has been around in some form or some element of it has been around since the 1880s. So that was interesting news for me. We'll then talk about the materials and tools that you need to do sublimation. A lot of it is chemistry. There's a certain temperature that your heat has to reach. There's only certain substrates it works with. So we will get you together on that. We'll also go through a step-by-step guide of what you need to do sublimation printing at home. This is how I do it. This is an overview of my technique, but it's very general. Next, we'll talk about a step-by-step guide to the sublimation process. This is basically how to do it. We'll also talk about what personal projects I have used in sublimation. Then we'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages. Next, we'll talk about applications where you already have seen sublimation garments. I'm sure you have some on you, in your home, in your person, or have 2 degrees of separation with someone who does. I know there are some folks who, for reasons you will soon learn, do not have any sublimation, and it's because of the fibers they choose to wear. We'll wrap up the episode talking about the pros and cons of sublimation printing. If you've ever seen my Easter outfits or back to school outfits, you'll know that I like to do custom labels for the first day of school, for Easter, and I've been doing that for my family for many years. One of the things that I do in making those garments is to document them with a special label. One that commemorates the occasion, the date, the name of the person that I'm making the garment for, sometimes the size, sometimes the pattern. These are all details that I arrange on my computer using my software program, something like a Canva, and then print off on my sublimation printer, and I can print it to whatever fabric I want, and I can use that as their garment labels. This is one example of how I have used sublimation printing in my sewing, and this is why I want to talk to you about it today. The thing that makes sublimation printing is chemistry. Sublimation is a process where the ink in the printer is transformed into a gas that bonds with synthetic fabrics, primarily polyester. So what you might have is a printer, like one that I have, and when I print out this note or label or document, and I take that sheet of paper and put it in the heat press, or I put it with some hand press that has a certain temperature, when the heat touches that ink, it immediately transforms into a gas. That gas then sinks down and grabs hold of the substrate. And that's how you get the image from the paper to the substrate. I'm going to give you a brief history of sublimation. This history is so brief because, believe it or not, the processes by which we can do sublimation printing today started in the 1880s with Marie Curie. I think she's the first woman to get the Nobel Prize in Science. Marie Curie's brothers discovered something called piezoelectricity. I am going to ask y'all to Google what that is, but it is some way that molecules move, and it became something that was necessary for having ink adhere in a gaseous state rather than in a liquid state. Very interesting. In the 1930s, a scientist named Kartakofs observed sublimation of dyes on cellulose acetate. So he sees this work. 10 years later, in 1940s, Winfield and Dixon patent PET, which is polyethylene terephthalate, which is PET, the same PET we see now on the bottles, on the bottoms of our like shampoo bottles or sometimes milk bottles, that PET. DuPont, around that same time, develops polyester fibers. Polyethylene terephthalate, PET, is an important element for what we know as polyester, which is what DuPont developed in the 40s. In 1950s, a Frenchman named Deplace invents dye sublimation printing. And that is an accumulation of the medium, the substrate, which is polyester, and then the type of dye that is activated by heat. And that's the sublimation. Then we get to the 1970s, which is around the time I was born. So holla, sublimation printing grows really big. Someone in California named Hoekstra develops computer-driven sublimation. So you can imagine here's more technological advance. Then in the 1980s, this is where we get to have this stuff at our house. All right. Right around the 1980s, the technologies that we will need to do it at home start to kick in. And that's electrostatic toner sublimation. This is like a printing medium that is going to be different than what it was before. That led to the 1990s having digital textile printing. And now we have the 2000s, and that's when home textiles and garments started to be printed on digital sublimation. So that leads us to today where we have inkjet, the inkjet printer. It really does lead the growth of digital sublimation printing. Digital sublimation being designing a certain design on the computer, having the colors be rendered faithfully when printed onto the transfer paper, then rendered faithfully again when pressed. So one of the important things to remember about sublimation printing is that it only works on polyester substrates, polyester or some type of PET-based substrate. It will not work on cotton. It will not work on linen. This is important. So there's folks who do not do polyester. There are folks who prefer natural fibers on their body. That would mean they wear cotton shirts, they wear linen, they wear flax, they wear silk. There's an amazing variety of natural fibers. And I can tell you that none of them will work with sublimation printing. There are workarounds where you can soak your fabric in a particular liquid for a while. You can spray it. You can put down this coating. But the reason sublimation printing works is part of the chemical structure of polyester itself. And that's what makes it work. If you don't believe me, I went full nerd, full blurred, full black nerd on this question and found an actual paper, industry paper from the sublimation industry, and found a paragraph to read to you. Blame yourselves, okay? You didn't understand why it had to be polyester. I said why. People were like, oh no, I'm going to try it on cotton. I'm going to do this and that. Girl, no, you're not, okay? You're going to have something else, but you are still not, you cannot make the chemical thing happen that will not happen through chemistry. So let's get into it. Here's what this industry paper says, and I have a link to this in the show notes for this episode. Here's what the industry paper says about why you cannot sublimate on a cotton t-shirt. Synthetic polymeric chains of polyester form tightly packed crystalline structures that are not receptive to the large molecules of the ionic dyes that are used to color and decorate natural fibers and fabrics, such as cotton, linen, wool, and silk. But the shape and size of dispersed dyes enables them to disperse their molecules between polyester's tightly packed polymer chains. See? So it can fit in there. Additionally, with heat and pressure, the synthetic polymer structure of polyester and other synthetic materials open up to accept the volatile dispersed dye molecules, which the synthetic polymers encapsulate as they cool. See? Get it? It's kind of like what I was seeing as I was reading this. I was seeing some kind of flower like open up and like have all the like pollen blow into it, which is kind of really ironic because why would you use a natural metaphor to describe something like polyester, which is probably going to outlive all of us? So, I'm acknowledging that's a little problematic. I don't know what to do about it, but there I was, me and my brain. I hope you understand a bit now about why polyester is required for sublimation. And when we get to the conclusion of today's episode, we'll talk about what some of the pros and cons of that are. When I get to the end of talking about sublimation, we're going to talk about the pros and the cons. But one of them, the pro is that it's polyester and the con is that it's polyester. That is both the greatest strength and weakness of this medium. Now, if you want to get started buying materials or understanding the process, here are some terms you will need to know when you start shopping around for your elements. Substrate, S-U-B-S-T-R-A-T-E. Substrate means the base material. This is usually a high polyester fabric, but there are also hard substrates like fans. Let's see. I'm thinking of there's fabric and textile things, socks, shirts, but there's also hard things, key rings, luggage tags, a lot of things that are made with this substance called MDF that I don't know what it stands for, but some kind of like board. So this is called a substrate. The next term I'll share with you is something that's called a blank. It's called a blank because these are blank substrates that are sold for sublimation. So the substrate is the base material, usually a high polyester fabric, but a blank is designed specifically to work with sublimation. I think it's just there are so many different businesses that sell blanks, and I've heard people talk about, I buy my blanks from this person, or I've got to order some blanks for this, or I saw some blanks over here. I've never heard folks say, I'm going to go buy some substrates. So in terms of just looking for what you need, you'll be looking for blanks. You're also looking for dye sublimation ink, and that is ink that sublimates under heat. And the heat has to be 400 degrees. I was told that 400 degrees was the magic number and that it had to hit that number in order to convert. I have since done some other sublimation projects where I went down to 380. And this is another one of the disadvantages of sublimation, is that it is not as regular as science. You have to do it is a science. It is an art and it is a science because you have to know so many things precisely. You have to have the right kind of ink. You have to have the right substrate. You have to have the right transfer medium. You need to have a heat press, which brings me to the next thing. Hey friends, hey, I know you're enjoying the audio version of Stitch Please, and thanks so much for listening. But you're missing out on all the great stuff going on behind the scenes. That's why I'm inviting you to join our Black Women Stitch Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can see all the video versions of the podcast. Plus, you get some amazing swatch cards. You know how much I love these swatch cards. Look, see how cool these are? You can't see them because you are not yet on the Patreon. So when you join the Patreon, you'll be able to see this, me showing you these amazing cards. We also have some great perks at the other tiers, like discounts, swag, office hours, and more. Don't be the last sewist in the group now. Head over to patreon.com/blackwomenstitch or click the link in the show notes and become a Patreon supporter today. We truly cannot do this without you. So thank you so much. The transfer paper is the medium that carries the digital design. The transfer paper is what you put in your printer, in your inkjet printer. You flip your image to the mirror side and you print it out. That is how you use a sublimation printer. It has to be in reverse because that is how the image will print onto your substrate. The heat press is important as well because the heat press will apply necessary heat and pressure. It has to be both. That's one of the reasons that it has to be a heat press and not an iron is because there are not many irons that allow you to set by temperature. There are some that do allow you to set by temperature, and I imagine that that would be fine to use for some smaller sublimation images or designs. But many people, if you wanted to cover a whole t-shirt or you wanted to do a 12 by 12 design, you're not going to want to pick up your iron 3 or 4 times to get that proper coverage. So this is why heat press is something you'll want for sublimation. I want to expand the conversation to think about tools and materials. I just talked about a heat press and why that was important, as well as the transfer paper, but I'm going to get into some other basics that you'll need of essential tools. You can buy a ready-made, already established sublimation printer out of the box, ready to go. You can also do what is called, quote unquote, converting and use an inkjet printer and just use sublimation ink in it. That's one of the things I find very irritating. You'll hear the phrase a lot in the crafting community that I have converted my printer. Y'all, they make it sound like, it has been some gigantic religious experience, like they have radically changed this printer that used to be a printer and now it's a toaster. It's not converted. It is the same thing, just using different inks. It could not be easier at the most fundamental level, but you would think that there's folks out there thinking they're doing actual brain surgery when it's really quite mid to, quote unquote, convert a printer. I've done it quite a few times. The thing I will mention, even though I typically do not talk about brands, is that because of the nature of sublimation ink, not all printers can do sublimation printing. For example, do it in a laser printer. Laser printers get too hot and the ink will sublimate, it'll turn into a gas before you can get it to the paper. It won't print at all on an inkjet. So it's not possible to do it on a laser printer. So skip that part. You can't do it on a laser printer. You have to do it on a printer that you can add ink to. And that's what an inkjet is. An inkjet is a printer that you can add ink to. However, you cannot just use any old inkjet for it. You have to get a printer where the print head does not get too hot and convert the ink into a gas before it has a chance to affix to the paper. And even though I don't like to talk about brands because no brand is paying me, it is important to note that the Epson printer has been the pioneer in the 80s and since we've been doing this, in the 2000s, for having a printer that does not have the ink heads get super hot. So I have been told that an Epson is really the only home printer that you can use effectively for sublimation. This could be easily contested. And so I'm going to put that out there as well. But I can say based on my experience, what I have done is I have only used Epson printers and I've had great success with those. And I will leave it at that since, again, this is not a sponsored episode, but that is a shout out. That is something, but I thought it was important to note that I've been told that you cannot just use any regular printer, any regular inkjet. It has to be an inkjet where the heads don't get too hot. There could be folks that have had a totally different experience. And if you have, girl, let me know. Tell me and say, oh, no, I've done this with a different brand of printer. I've been doing it for the last several years and I had a difficulty. I will absolutely share that information. So please let me know. After you've chosen your ink, your sublimation ink, and your sublimation printer, the next thing you're going to need is the materials you are going to use to print on. Well, the substrate is the type. So basically, what blanks are you going to use? What do you want to make? I've made fans, I've made t-shirts, bonnets, pillowcases, fabric labels, garment labels, customized garment elements to make things, customized. That's been a lot of fun. So All of these are examples of the blanks that I used. The thing they all have in common is polyester. All of these have a high level of polyester. There are pages, Facebook groups, and YouTube groups where you can find sublimation products from the Dollar Tree because the Dollar Tree has a lot of polyester. So folks are doing those cozy covers that go on steering wheels, mouse pads. All of these are things that could be easily considered sublimation blanks because they have substrates that are appropriate for sublimation. Okay, so now here comes a step-by-step guide in how to use sublimation, how you do it at home, how I do it at home. It's a really simple process. I've broken this down into a step-by-step 4-step process. Design, print, prepare, and press. Okay, that's pretty good, right? To begin, we'll start with design creation. You're going to use a graphic design software to create and edit your design. And that's one of the great things about sublimation. Whatever you can print on your laptop, you can print on the sublimation printer. I've printed gigantic anime things that my kids liked and were interested in. I've printed recipes. I saw one guy on social media who was going to Costco and he did not want his chickens, those rotisserie chickens, to be scanned. So he demanded that his shirt be scanned instead. And that is because someone had sublimated the barcode for Costco chickens onto his shirt. And that's how he got that. So I guess it could be screen printing as well, but it looked like sublimation. Choose a graphic design software that you are most comfortable with. There are a lot of them out there and none of them are paying me yet. Canva is one that I have used. But also, if you have a cutting machine like a Silhouette Cameo or a Cricut or a Brother Scan and Cut, or I think Caesar has a cutter, all of them will have design software that go with their cutters. And at least for the Cameo, you don't have to own a Cameo to use that software. Affinity Designer is another one that people like. GIMP is another program which is free that I know that folks like. Whatever software you typically feel comfortable with and use, you can use that. Even if it's, whatever's built into your computer already. That's another element that you can use. I also like how you can buy different digital elements from these software banks or these graphic design that have digital art banks, and you can use those and put those in your designs. Very fun. The next step is printing. You will print your design on sublimation paper, sublimation transfer paper. The settings are important, and there are lots of details and tutorials you can find to figure out how to do that. But there's preferences that you'll need to set up in the physical printer, and there's also preferences you'll need to set up in the software so that your computer can communicate the right color codes to the printer. That's called a color profile. It's how your printer handles color. It's how your computer sees color. Because one of the most frustrating things about sublimation is that what you might see on the computer and what you see printed out onto your paper is different than what you get when it is heated. And that is one of the things that makes sublimation, is that when it converts from that ink state into a gas state, the colors can be determined and shaped by so many different factors. This is why you have color codes or hex codes or RGB codes if you want to have something the exact specific color. But you also have to make sure that your printer and the software on your computer are set up to talk to each other in such a way that when you print it out and then you press it, it will look the way it should. It is very easy to get colors wrong in sublimation. You'll also want to print your image in reverse. When you're printing your image out, imagine you're writing a letter and you want the letter printed on sublimation. I've done that for making flags and banners. You want that image to be reversed when you look at it so that when you press it, it will be right side. The letters will be in the proper orientation. So just remember to mirror image in your print setting. When it comes to preparing your fabric or your substrate, you want to make sure that it's clean. I often have a lint roller nearby. I actually have 2 lint rollers near the heat press so I can lint roll whatever the blank is, even if it's not a fiber blank, you'll want to make sure that it's dusted off and cleaned. A lint roller is really good for that. A lint roller will get things off that you don't see. And I have had the experience of not preparing that fabric, not preparing that substrate, and keeping some lint on there that I did not see. But when I pressed that sublimation thing, when I pressed that sublimation design onto that blank, it looked like little tiny confetti. It was all these little pieces where the dye did not transfer because it was dust in the way. And so I ended up having to throw that away. So save yourself some time and money and a headache and use a lint roller to clean off your fabric blanks and to dust off any mugs you're using or any solid medium. Just make sure it is clean and dust free. If you're working with a fabric medium, you'll want to pre-press. I like to pre-press to make sure there's no moisture in the blank that would cause blooming or any type of design shift or transfer for the sublimation. One of the great things for doing sublimation at home is that it gives you a chance to experiment with what manufacturing might be like for yourself. I really appreciate how it expands my creative horizons. I love that it allows me to make things and create things that I can see in my imagination that don't exist in the world, and I can help to get them into the world just by printing them out and putting them on a t-shirt. That I have been loving. I want to turn to talking about the personal project and the applications that I have used sublimation for. And I come to sublimation, as I mentioned earlier, from the craft medium of heat transfer vinyl. Heat transfer vinyl was something that required a cutting machine. You used a mat, or for some machines like the one that I have, you did not need a mat. But the heat transfer vinyl came on sheets or on rolls. You fed it through the machine. It was usually one color or maybe a few colors decorative together, and some had decorative prints, but it was a very time-consuming process. You had to do what was called weeding. You had to press it onto the shirt and make sure that the adhesive didn't get overcooked. And there was always the chance that when washing or stretching or in lots of wear, that the heat transfer vinyl would peel up or crack or come apart. I think something for many, I was going to say for many crafters, we want our work to look really good. That's not a fair statement. For myself, Lisa Woolfork, I like my stuff to look as good as absolutely possible. I really care about craft. I want it to be mistaken for a store-bought thing. This is funny, when I first started sewing, I thought it was a compliment to have my work compared to store-bought things. But now I'm realizing that the work that I do is so much better than what you can buy in a store that now I don't consider that a compliment. But there was a long time that I did consider it a compliment. You know what I stopped considering that a compliment, y'all, for real? I stopped considering that it looks like it's store-bought a compliment when somebody said to me, "Oh, that is so nice. It looks like you got that from Target." Now, I don't mean Target, with our good and great sis Tabitha Brown has blessed that place with some warmth, joy, bliss, bright style. I see tons of stuff in there. And I'm like, ooh, that is fire. This was the pre-Tabitha Brown. This was pre-2015 Target. Okay? Target is not making exciting, cool clothes yet. Target. Anyway, I was pissed. And I was like, let me not. And so I didn't. All is to say, when you care about craft, there are certain things you want to preserve. I want to preserve the history of a document. I want to preserve the history of a garment. I want to preserve a record of a project. I want to document my process. All of these are things that I have been able to do using sublimation. I've also been able to deeply personalize things. So let me just get into it. Sublimation printing has been really exciting for my sewing practice. I have used it to create so many things. Garment labels, my fave. I have been loving that. I love that I can make something from my mother and put our picture in it, or something from my family and put a family photo in it, or put pictures of the kids of themselves in their clothes. Like, that's been pretty amazing. Pictures of themselves in their jackets. Like, this is this child's jacket. Those are really small things, but they have been ways that I like to show our family history, to tell our story. And that is one thing I have really enjoyed about sublimation, is the garment labels. Similarly, I've been printing t-shirts at home. Some of the merch that I have in the shop, that I've been releasing new art. And rather than buy samples or mock-ups, I will make a sample or mock-up so people can see what it would look like. And so having these kinds of things has been very fun, to be able to merchandise right here at home in the smallest of quantities. That has been really helpful. I've made socks. I'm looking now at the sheet from one of the vendors that I work with, and he's got masks and socks and boxers and beanie hats and sleeve, like the sleeves, you can pull up a sleeve on your arm, and the things, they also have them for their legs, all of that stuff. Dog clothes, capes, all kinds of stuff that you can sublimate. Very cute. Ribbon. Ribbon is a very popular thing to sublimate. You see that already. If you go to the craft store, you'll see wide ribbons that have really cool designs on them. Those were printed with sublimation, and you can do something similar. I have made garment labels by taking ribbon, folding it in half and pressing it, and that becomes the basis of a label, and all I need to do is finish the raw edge. There are plenty of sublimatable towels at the Dollar Tree, and they are worth whatever they have in the 5-quarter store. These things are not good to be used on hot items. I don't see how they manage it. An important part of any conversation about sublimation is to weigh the pros and cons. What are the advantages and the disadvantages? And as I said earlier, polyester is both the advantage and disadvantage of sublimation printing. I think that that is key. The advantage of polyester is that it is widely available. And in fact, the disadvantage of polyester is that it is widely available. Polyester is one of those fabrics, because of its environmental damage that it does to the planet, even as we try to recycle and upcycle. Someone asked, why does Joann Fabrics have so much fleece? Why is it so much fleece? Fleece, fleece, fleece. Do you know what fleece is made of? Fleece is made of recycled plastic bottles. And now it's just occurring to me why there's so much fleece at Joann Fabric, because fleece is being made out of recycled water bottles. And we just have so many of them that's why we have to turn them into 90,000 yards of fleece for every Joann store in America. That's what we get for wanting to drink out of plastic water bottles. Wouldn't that be interesting that that's our punishment? Is that the only thing we can sew with is fleece, even in the summertime? To return to sublimation printing, which only works on polyester and the PET-based substrates, here's some of the benefits of sublimation printing.
You've been listening to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. We appreciate you joining us this week and every week for stories that center Black women, girls, and femmes in sewing. We invite you to join the Black Women Stitch Patreon community with giving levels beginning at $5 a month. Your contributions help us bring the Stitch Please podcast to you every week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And come back next week and we'll help you get your stitch together.